Okay, today's daf we're going to learn today is Shabbat Daf Kuf Nun Gimel. Today's daf is sponsored by Rabbanit Michelle in memory of her mother, Leah ben Shoshan, that all her life she dedicated to learning Torah, teaching a love of Torah to her children, to her nieces, and to her students. We're going to start at the top of the page, Amar Rav Yehuda Bereid Rav Shmuel Bar Shilat. We're going to continue and finish off this issue all about death and specifically about funerals. And hespedim, eulogies, and the importance of the eulogizer, or maybe not, we'll see. So we're going to start with the statement of Rav Yehuda Bereid Rav Shmuel Bar Shilat, Mishmei de Rav. He said in the name of Rav, Mehespedo shel adam nikar im ben haolam haba im lav. When you're at someone's funeral, you can tell by the eulogy if the person is going to olam haba. How can you tell? You can tell by how much people were moved by what the eulogizer said. If people were moved, then that means this was an important person and he will end up in Olam Haba, or she will. So the Gemara questions and says, Ini v'ha'amar le'Rav Shmuel Bar Shilat. Now notice, this was said, I just want to remind you, by Rav Yehuda, the son of Rav Shmuel Bar Shilat, in the name of Rav. So there's a connection between the characters here. So now Rav said to Rav Shmuel Bar Shilat, Achim behespeda. When it comes time to my hesped, okay, he was concerned with what was going to be. So when they eulogize me, make sure that they garner up emotion, okay? Make sure you get people, you move people with it. You warm them up in my hesped, right? To warm them up, meaning get them to cry. So now they say, so wait, let's see. And then what does he say to him? Dahatam ka'imna, because I'm going to be standing there, okay? It's like a way of putting your fear in your students. I'm going to be listening to every word. This goes back to what we saw yesterday, that the dead person can still hear, right? Again, I don't think it really means that he hears, but his point is, imagine it as if I'm standing there. Now, this is a little strange. What does he want here, right? So it seems that, I think, it sounds, maybe you could view this as arrogant, but I don't think it's viewed as arrogant. I think what he means is, Rav spent his whole life teaching and having influence on people. And what he wanted was that at his funeral, it was, his last big opportunity to be able to influence people. And we all know that funerals can be very emotional and can really have impact on people. And what he said is, make sure not to miss the opportunity to have a huge impact on people at my funeral. But now the problem is that it sounds like only if he moves people is it going to be an indicator that Rav is ben olam haba. And that's the idea that he's telling him, warn people, get people motivated, sounds like, well, if people didn't cry at Rav's funeral, then he wasn't going to be ben olam haba. We know Rav is a tzaddik. So, and obviously he's heading to olam haba. So what are the answer? Lo kasha, had mechamu le ba'achim, had mechamu le v'lo achim. It's not, the idea is, I think what the Gemara is saying here, it's a little bit confusing, but I think the Gemara is trying to say that it sounds like it's up to the eulogizer, when according to the statement of Rav before, it's up to the person, right? Whether the people are moved has to do with the person themselves and not with the eulogizer. So now they're going to say, well, look, it's important for the eulogizer to do a good job preparing how to eulogize the person. But in the end, let's say the eulogizer eulogizes some guy who was really not worth much at all. So he's not going to move people. You could be the best orator, but if your content is bad, you're not going to, or is unemotional, you're not going to move anybody. You might say a great speech, but it's not going to really move anybody. So therefore, it looks to me like there's kind of three possibilities, or it breaks down into two. There's people that it doesn't matter what the eulogizer says, they're going to olam haba whether or not the eulogizer moves people or not, or maybe it doesn't really matter what the eulogizer does, people are going to be moved. But then there's the eulogizer can either move people or not move people. And sometimes, right, it all depends on whether the person has enough. And the eulogizer's job is to try to spark emotion, but he's not necessarily always going to be successful based on who the person is and what the person has done in their lives. But I always used to think about it, that sometimes when you go to funerals, you feel like everybody you hear about was an amazing person, because even someone who's not a great person, still you can describe certain things about their lives that were amazing, right? People always have something to them. So just to a certain extent, the eulogizer does a good job. They can manage to pull all the beautiful things about that person. So still not, right? Anyway, we don't really ever have an indicator whether someone's going to olam haba or not. So that's another whole question with the sugya. It's not like we can say, oh, check, we know this person's going, we know that person's not going. But in any case, that's how they end. Amalei Abai le-Rabba. Here's a really strange line. Abai, if you remember, was adopted by Rabba. So he says to Rabba, often they have conversations, Kigon Mar, he says, what about someone like you? Disane le kulu pumbedita. All the people of Pumbedita hate you. It's a very strange line. All people hated Rabbah. So first of all, it's very likely, or the way they explain it, is that Rabbah, Rashi says, Mishum demuchach lehu b'milei deshmaya. He was constantly rebuking them. And because of that, they didn't like him because he was constantly giving them rebuke. And therefore, the people of Pumbedita didn't like him at all. So basically, he's saying, what's going to happen to your hesped? As if the whole idea is that if people are moved by the hesped, so he says, man achim hespeda. Who's going to get people to move at your funeral? So Amarle, mistaya at verabba barav Hanan. So he says, now it's two ways to read this. Either it's enough, and who's going to do the hesped? Well, he says, you're going to do it. Or Rabba barav Hanan, the two of you will do my hesped, and I'm not worried. You'll move the people. Or you could say, no, the two of you are going to do this, and really, no one's going to be moved by it. In other words, the two of you will be moved, and that will be enough. And then it's an issue of, let's say, quality versus quantity. It doesn't matter how many people are moved. It's a matter of the quality of who's moved. If you can move the people who are the good people around, then it means you're worthy. And if you can't, then, if you can't even move anybody, well, then you're not going to be worthy. Okay, so anyway, it's interesting to think about this. Maybe you would say the opposite. You'd say, no, the fact that he had influence on two people and not on the rest of his city, maybe that's a downside of someone like that. It shows that there's something missing here. What I wanted to point out here, they have a nice footnote in the Koran that quotes a sugya in Ketubot, which says that Abaye says, if a sage is beloved by the inhabitants of a city, he says it's not because he's such a great leader, but it's because he doesn't rebuke them. And this could be a reference to Rabbah. In other words, if you're loved by the city, that's not always a good indicator. Okay, and maybe he was trying to protect Rabbah when he made that statement. I like the way they connected that statement with this. Okay, so in any case, he says, it's fine. Don't worry about me. You guys will either take care of my hesped or you'll be the ones crying and that will be sufficient. Ba'amine Rabbi Elazar Mechav. So Rabbi Elazar asked Rav the following question. Ezehu ben olam haba. Okay, it's the question we all like to know. Right? What makes someone a ben olam haba? Amarle. Right, your ears will hear something from behind you saying, in other words, when you're in your deathbed, you'll hear people saying, this is what you should do. You should be like this person. Okay? If you hear that, you know that you're ben olam haba. Meaning, this is again, goes back to what we said before. It's a very interesting debate we're going to see. If people follow you, right, which is a weakness in Rabbah, the people didn't really follow him. But if people follow you, then that's a good sign. Rabbi Chanina Amar, Kol Shadat Rabotenu Nochehimenu. And I thought about this, it's very interesting. If you're rabbi, okay, first of all, there's two nuschaot. There's actually three ways. Okay, there's one which is people follow you. The next is Rabotenu, your rabbis. And the third option is instead of saying Rabotenu, it says the Rabbanim. I forget the exact year, so let me see. Rabotav or Rabotenu. Right, sorry, I explained it wrong. Either it's Rabotav, his own rabbis, or it's Rabotenu, our rabbis. So basically you have three possibilities. Either what makes you a great person is if people follow you, not necessarily the rabbis. The rabbis might not like what you're doing, but if people follow you, as you could have your own, we all know there's people who have, maybe go against the grain when it comes to rabbinic opinions, and they have their own rabbinic opinions, and the other rabbis maybe don't agree with that. But if you have people who say, this is a good person, we're going to follow this person, that's something. Then you have people who maybe other rabbis don't agree with them, but his own rabbis agree with him because maybe his own rabbis have a particular approach and he's following that. Or maybe you need all the rabbis to agree with you, kind of the general. That's what makes you ben olam haba. So these are three different interesting options to think about. Okay. Now, if you remember, how did we get to this? We were darshaning all these verses in Kohelet, which talk about what's going to happen to you when you die. So the end of the verse we were up to, we said, Ki olech adam al beit olamo, and then we said, right, that each person has their own place, right, in the shiur of the city, everybody goes in together, but then when they lie down, they each get their own place. It says that tzaddikim each have their own place to rest. Then it says, V'savavu b'shuk hasofdim. So what does this mean? B'nei Galila amre, right, the shuk of the people who give the eulogies. B'nei Galil, in the Galil they said, Aseh dvarim lifnei mitatcha. This is people who, right, that they'll say, it's the things that they say about you before your bier. B'nei Yehuda amre, Aseh dvarim la'achar mitatcha. the things they say about you behind your beer. So now they say velo plige, but there's really no difference. Marki atre, marki atre. It's discussing each place. They had a different custom about whether people would stand before or behind it. In other words, what this is saying is, and then they'll savavu b'shuka softim, where they're going to speak about you either before your beer or behind your beer. Okay, that was just a difference of custom. Tanan hatam. There's a Mishnah that says, now we get to a very famous line, Rabbi Lezer Omer, Shuv yom echad lifnei mitatcha. You should make sure to do tshuva one day before you die, right? The day before you die, make sure to do tshuva. Okay, to which the obvious question, Shalu Talmidav Rabbi Eliezer, B'chiyatam yodeh, eze yom yamut? How do I know when I'm supposed to do tshuva? I don't know when I'm going to die. Amar lahen, v'kol sheken yashuva yom shema yamut l'machar. He says, that's right. That's why do tshuva now, because you don't know what's happening tomorrow. V'nimtzeu kol yamav b'tshuva. Basically, you should be doing tshuva every day. This is a certain approach some people have in life, right, where you feel like every day might be, your last day of life. Live life to the fullest because you never really know when you're going to die. Ba'af Shlomo amar b'chochmato, and here we can see this also. Shlomo again, pasuk from Kohelet. What did he say? B'chol eit yu bagadecha levanim, v'shemen al roshcha al yechsar. At all times, your clothes should be white, and you should have oil on your head. Meaning, basically, you should always be ready for death. So Amar Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says he's going to give a mashal. This is very similar to the structure of the mashal we saw yesterday. Mashal lemelech shezimenet avadav l'seuda. We have a mashal, a king parable. A king invites his servants to a meal. V'lo kavalem zman, but doesn't tell them when the meal is going to be. Pikchim shebehem, the wise ones among them, kishtu et atzmam v'yashvu al petach beit hamelech. They get all dressed, they're ready, and where are they waiting? On the doorstep of the king, so that the moment the king says, the meal is now, they're going to come right in. What do they say? Amru, klum chaser lebeit hamelech. The Beit HaMelech has everything. He's got a fully stocked house. He's got lots of servants. Remember, we saw the other day, 10 people could fill one bath in one snap of a finger. Likewise here, they have enough servants that they could whip up a meal, chick-chock. So therefore, he might be calling us any minute. Let's get ready. Tipshim shebehem, but the non-wise ones among them, halchu lemelachtan. They went to work. They weren't going to wait around sitting on the doorstep. Amru, klum yirsu dabelo tohach. He's going to have to prepare for the meal. So immediately the melech goes to look for servants, right? And as not immediately at one sudden moment, he says, I'm inviting everybody. And what happens? So so the wise ones who were waiting there come in all dressed up. They're filthy with their dirty work clothes. So what do we say? So the king is very happy with his wise ones and very unhappy with the non-wise ones. So he says the ones who decorated themselves, and came all nice and dressed, they'll sit and eat and drink. Now, what's their biggest punishment? Well, they're going to be punished twice. Yamdu v'yiru. They're going to stand and watch. That means, number one, they're not going to get any food. Number two, they're going to be embarrassed because they're just standing up. That's embarrassing. Everyone's going to look at them and say, oh, look, those are the people who weren't prepared. So now they say, Chotano shel Rabbi Meir, Mishum Rabbi Meir. So the son-in-law of Rabbi Meir says in the name of Rabbi Meir, Amal, Af hein nir'im kimishamshim. That's not a good embarrassment. If they stand on the side, they're going to look like the people working there. Ela, elu ve'elu yoshvin, halalu ochlim v'halalu revim. They're going to sit. To sit and not get served food is much more embarrassing. If they're standing on the side, they'll look like they're working there. But to really embarrass them, what do? You seat them and you don't feed them. Halalu shotim v'halalu tzmeim, right? So that, as everyone else is eating, they're not eating. Everyone else is drinking, they're not drinking. That's the biggest embarrassment. Shenemal, Koma Hashem, and they quote it from a pasuk in Yeshayahu. Hine avada yochlu v'atem tiravu. Hine avada yeshu v'atem titzmeu. Right? They're going to be eating and you're not going to get anything. They're going to be drinking and you're not going to be drinking. Hine avada yaronu mituv lev. They're going to be happy with a happy heart. V'atem titzaku mike'ev lev. And you're going to be crying out with a broken heart. Davar acher. Okay, so that's all this approach that we had. The b'chol eit yu b'gadecha levanim and shemen al roshcha. You should always be ready for the day of death. You never know when God's going to beckon you to come. But now they say davar acher, a different way to understand that verse in Kohelet. B'chol eit yu b'gadecha levanim, elu tzitzit. V'shemen al roshcha al yachzar, elu tefillin. This means you should always be covered in mitzvot. You should be wearing your tzitzit, you should be wearing your tefillin, right? Which again, so for women, maybe we don't have these things, but the idea being that you should, it's really just figuratively, you should cover yourself with mitzvot all the time. You should always be involved in mitzvot, and that's the best way to be, always. It's not ready in the same way, ready for death. It's a different kind of ready. Okay, Hadron al Shoel, and with this we're going to start the very final parak of Masechet Shabbat. Okay, there's a sheet for today. Somebody wants to put it up in the chat. That would be great. There's a sheet charting out some of the Gemara, part of the Gemara. Okay, now we get to a very interesting case. So you go on a trip and you come back and the flight's delayed and it's Friday afternoon, right? People always say, don't travel Friday afternoon for this reason. It's Friday afternoon, your plane lands late and you got to get home for Shabbat. And you get into a cab and you start driving and all of a sudden you realize you're not going to make it in time. So what do? Okay, I'm not going to talk about the right. Ideally, again, I'm not going to get into all the halachot and what do you do if you're outside Tchum, but theoretically, if you can walk home from wherever it is when Shabbat comes in, you get out of the car and you walk. That's fine. You can walk, no problem, assuming you're within the boundaries of the city. But what do you do with your stuff, with your luggage, right? How do we handle your luggage at this point? And your wallet and all your money and everything else. You can't carry that, right? First of all, you have a muktzah problem. Second of all, you have a hotzah, right? You're carrying. So what are you going to do? So the Mishnah starts off and says, Mishich shich baderech, okay? It starts getting dark and you realize Shabbat's coming in and you're still on your way. No ten kiso lenochli. So what do? You give your money to a non-Jew and you say, please take it home. So let's say you're in that cab, assuming it's a non-Jewish taxi driver. So you say, listen, I'm getting out. Please drive my stuff to my house, okay? You can do that. V'im eini mo nochri, what if you don't have a nochri? This is a little less likely for us. Minicho ala chamor. You can put it on your donkey and walk your donkey home. That will work. Higia lachatzara chitzona, when you get now into the city, to the outer courtyard, we saw this before with the other case, when your clothes were wet, notelet hakelim anitalim b'Shabbat. You can take, if you have things that aren't muktzah in there, you can carry them, take them off the donkey. V'sheinan nitalim b'Shabbat, matir hachavalim b'asakin noflim elehen. The ones that you can't move, so you untie the ropes. You'd have to assume this is not a kesher shel kayama. It's not a problem of untying. Untie the ropes, the bags fall on their own. Okay, now what's the issue here? Why do you need to take the bags off? The issue is that it's tsar ba'alei chayim for the animal. You don't want the animal to suffer carrying your big heavy suitcase all Shabbat. So it's unfair to leave the animal like that. So therefore you untie the knot and let it fall down on its own. So now the Gemara starts off and explains, why do we allow you to do this? Didn't we say that a nochri can't, this is a nochri doing malacha just for you. We've already discussed that a nochri can't do things just for you, only if the nochri is doing it for himself, for other non-Jews. So how do we allow this? So my time is shagu le Rabbanan, lemeitav kisei lenochri. Why do they allow us to give our money to a non-Jew to carry for us? Kim lehu le Rabbanan, the rabbis understood, the ein adama mirat small mamono. Remember we learned this before with the fire. We know that people aren't going to just leave their wallets behind. No way. So if we don't allow it, what will happen? People are just going to take their wallet home and say, I don't care. And they're going to carry it home. And therefore, to prevent that from happening, we allow this. I just want to point out one difference, big difference between this and the fire. In the fire case, because Adam Bahula Mamono, what do we say? We don't allow you to do all sorts of things. We don't allow you to carry everything out because we're worried you're going to put out the fire. Here, we specifically allow you because we're worried that you're going to do something worse. So it's interesting that it ends up different. One of the differences I saw written is that in the fire case, you're panicked because there's a fire. Whereas here, you're not in a panic situation. I mean, maybe some people will get a little panicked about this, but it's not the same kind of panic, okay? It's more like worry, okay, well, I got to plan out what am I going to do, but it's not like it happens all of a sudden, a fire breaks out. You have to figure it out. So you're less panicked, and therefore we can allow you to do things within certain parameters, and we're not worried that you're going to end up doing more, let's say. Here, there's also no concern. There, the concern was more, right? You'll put out the fire. Here, we're saying, no, you can give it to him, and then obviously it's all resolved. Okay. Someone says because it's D'Rabbanan, but even there it's possible it was D'Rabbanan there also, because remember, putting out a fire, if you don't need the coals or something like that is also really only D'Rabbanan. It's in Lachshin, it's Tzricha Legufa. So also, and this isn't D'Rabbanan, which to carry Arba Mot B'Reshut Rabim is D'Oraita, so I'm not sure of the question. Anyway, it's and yes, and also the language was different. There was Ma'amid, here it's Ma'amid, and there it's Bahul. Because there you're really Bahul. You're very worked up, panicked. Okay, so now Amarava. Dafka Kiso. Here's an interesting thing. He says, only your money. Aval mitzi'alo. But what if you found something on the street? You found you found a bag of money that wasn't yours. Are you allowed to give that to a nachri? So it says kiso, yours, but not if you found something. So now they say like this. Pshita, isn't that obvious? Obviously, it's only your stuff you can give. You can't give them something you just found. Now, when they say something you found, they mean something you found that you don't have to return. Something that has no simanim on it, no obvious signs, and you wouldn't have to return it. It would be something you could actually keep. But they're saying, obviously, it's kiso. It says yours, not something that you just find. Kisot's not. So now they say, no, mahu detema, you might have thought, hu adin afilu mitzia, maybe even something you found. Katani kiso or chademilta katani. It just said kiso because that's a more typical case, as I explained, right? You're coming home and you want to bring your stuff. The fact that you would find something and then want to bring that home is a less likely scenario. You don't often find lost items on the floor that you could keep. So therefore, right, so that's the question. And that's the concern. Therefore, Kamash Malam, Rava needs to tell you, this does not include a mitzia. And we're going to have to see why. V'lo maran ela delo ate liyade. Okay, we're going to have two versions. So now we're going to say it in the first version, and then we'll see the second. This is only if you didn't yet acquire the item. Aval ate liyade kikise dami. Let's assume it's Friday afternoon, just before Shabbat, and you find a bag of money laying on the floor. Okay, a wallet. Or no, a wallet wouldn't be a good idea, but something with no signs whatsoever, a pile of money. Okay, you find some cash. You pick up that cash. Now, if you pick up the cash and you lift it in a way that you acquired it, then it's yours. So according to the Gemara now, that's the same as kiso. That became yours. You can give that to a nochri. But if you didn't yet pick it up, you kind of saw it and said, oh, that's mine, I'm going to take that. But you haven't yet acquired it. You haven't done what we call a kinyan. We're going to get into all this much later in Shas about kinyanim, but you haven't acquired it by lifting it. You have to lift it 3 tefachim or something. If you haven't lifted it, then it's not yours. And then that's what we're talking about. Rav is saying you can't. Okay, you can't give that to a nochri. Ika da amre, some people say no. That wasn't the question. And that would be a strange question because normally if you did see the money, you'd have picked it up already. So it seems a little odd that he'd be telling you a whole halacha about this. It's already strange that you actually found something and then the question is you didn't even acquire it yet would be weird. So the second version makes more sense. And it's a very interesting logic here. Some people say that that Rava actually started with a question, not a statement. Remember, there he said a statement, and then the Gemara said, isn't that obvious? But now he said, Mitziah habali adom mahu. What's the status of a mitzia that you acquired? Meaning you already picked it up before Shabbat. Do we say that you can give that to a non-Jew or not? Why? Would you say, Kevan da'atet liyade, since you already acquired it, kikise dami, it's as if it's your own. O dilma, or do we say, Kevan de lo tarach ba lav kikise dami? Fascinating thought. Since you didn't work hard for this and you just found it on the street, what's the whole idea? No. People are very worked up about their money. But this was something you just found. It wasn't yours. You didn't work for it. If that's the case, right, we all know that we feel a little bit differently about something that we worked hard to earn versus something that we just found. If I find something on the street and then I immediately lose it, I'm not going to get terribly upset about it. So therefore, maybe this whole concept of being concerned that I'm going to carry it for Amud and Rashid or Rabim and therefore allowing me to give it to a non-Jew isn't relevant for something I found on the street. So that's his question. Is this, or do we say, once I acquired it, it's mine and all my money is mine. It doesn't matter whether I worked hard for it or whether I found it. And then, by the way, it seems like it would be even something you found 3 months ago, right? It could be something like that. So Teku, the Gemara actually doesn't have an answer according to this version. Now we're going to go through, and this is where my sheet starts today, about going through the order of who do you give it to. Let's say there's no non-Jew around, right? In Israel, this would be more of an issue. Obviously, the issue of a donkey is not going to really help us very much because that's even less likely. But, Eini monochri, so now the Gemara says, Tama de Eini monochri, ha yeshi monochri, linochri yaivle. So now they say, notice how it goes. It says, if you're on the way, give it to a nochri. if there's no nochli, there's no non-Jew, then put it on a donkey. So therefore, they infer from here that you can only give it to your donkey, meaning there's a hierarchy here, only if there's no nochli. My timer, what's the reason for this hierarchy? If you remember when we say this in Kiddush every Shabbat, you say the part about Zachor Yom Shabbat L'Kadsho, it says, right, so that you and your son and your daughter and your servants and your donkey and your behemot all have to rest. So your behemot are commanded to rest on Shabbat. But the non-Jew is not commanded to rest on Shabbat. So therefore, if you're going to choose, we're going to choose the non-Jew first. Okay, if you have no choice, then we allow even the animal. Okay, even though you're really not supposed to work your animal. What about, now they're going to go through another list. The Mishnah just gave us two possibilities, but now they want to bring up other possibilities. What if you have a chamor and a cheresh shotev katan? Those three are in the category of someone deaf, who's generally deaf, who also can't hear and can't speak. That's usually the category deaf that we mean, which again is someone who they assume doesn't have knowledge, understanding, like your deaf mute. And we have a shoteh, someone who brain function is impaired, and a katan, a young child who's not obligated to mitzvot. So what if you have those three or a donkey? Who goes first? A chamor manachle, so we're going to give it to the chamor. L'cheresh shotev katan lo yavle, so we're going to choose the chamor is next in line. Why is that? Hane adam, hai lav adam. Okay, because we'd rather give it to a non-human than a human. Okay, right, again, the nochri comes first, even though he's human, because the nochri is not commanded to keep Shabbat. But then when we get to all the people who are commanded to keep Shabbat, now you might say the cheresh shotev katan aren't really commanded to keep Shabbat, but they are Jews, they are within the Shabbat restrictions in a general sense, and therefore we'd rather choose the animal over the human. Cheresh v'shoteh, what about if you have a cheresh, a deaf mute, and a shoteh? Who do you give it to? So they answer l'shoteh, okay? Because again, as I said, the deaf mute is considered to have partial knowledge and understanding, but less than average. Shoteh v'katan, l'shoteh. If you have a shoteh and a katan, so who's going to get it? The shoteh. Better the shoteh than the katan. The katan is always considered less likely. Why? Because a katan will eventually get to mitzvot. He'll be chayav in mitzvot at a certain point. What about the cheresh and the katan? So again, you have these, they're already, we don't know which one. There's definitely no question according to Rabbi Eliezer, because look at Rabbi Eliezer's shita, Detanya. Rabbi Yitzchak omer mishum Rabbi Eliezer, tchumat cheresh lo tetzeh l'chule mipnei shu safek. What if the following people, there's a whole debate about if the following people, all the people we just talked about, cheresh shotev katan, or a nochri, for example, or we're going to see someone who it's not his produce, even a Jew, it's not his produce, takes truma, okay? He separates the truma to masrot. Is his truma considered sanctified, okay? Does it work or does it not work? So according to Rabbi Eliezer, or according to Rabbi Yitzchak in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, the truma of a cheresh is safek. We're going to say maybe it actually is effective, his truma. Because there's a possibility it's effective, what do you see? And not true for the rest of them. Therefore, the cheresh is going to be considered more da'at than the rest, and we're going to give it to the katan and then to the cheresh. So now they say, but kiti ba'ilach. So according to him, we certainly don't have a question. It's obvious. The question is, aliba de Rabbanan. According to the rabbis, though, ditnan, as it says in the Mishnah, Chamisha lo yitromu. There's 5 types of people who shouldn't give truma to masrot. Ve'im tarmu ein trumatam truma. And if they do it, totally ineffective. Elohen, who are these 5 people? Cheresh v'shoteh v'katan. Okay, the first 3 we know. Hatorem et she'eno shelo. If I go into your field and start taking truma to masrot, right, without asking you. V'nochri shetaram et shel Yisrael afilu b'rshuto. And a non-Jew who does the truma to masrot for my stuff, even if I gave him permission, it still doesn't work. Ein trumato truma. Okay, all those people, it's not effective. So according to the rabbis, where they're all in the same category and they don't distinguish like Rabbi Eliezer does, who's going to go, who are you more likely to give it to, the cheresh or the katan? So now they say, l'cheresh yavle, maybe you would say give it to the cheresh. Why? De katan ate l'chlal dat, because the child will eventually, the minor will become, he will have knowledge at some point when he grows up. O dilma, or do you say, l'katan yavle, de cheresh ate l'chlufe begadol pikech. The cheresh doesn't look so different from the average person. So if we allow you to give it to a cheresh, people might see and people might think, oh, maybe I could give it to a gadol, a regular person who's not a cheresh. So therefore, we say maybe you shouldn't give it to the cheresh. And as if you give it to a katan, everyone's going to see it's very obvious is a katan. So they say, Ika d'amre l'cheresh yavle and Ika d'amre l'katan yavle. There's no answer. Some people side on one side and some people go on the other side, and we don't have an actual answer. Okay, so we had, according to Rabbi Eliezer, we have an answer, but according to this, we don't really have a clear answer. Ein sham lo nochri velo chamor velo cheresh velo shoteh velo katan. What if none of these possibilities exist? What do? And now we enter into a very interesting part of our daf. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, od acheret hayta. There actually is another solution, but lo ratzu chachamim legalota. The rabbis didn't want to tell anybody the solution. So, my od acheret hayta, we're obviously very curious. So, what is the solution that the rabbis didn't want to tell people? Right? It's funny. So the rabbis didn't want to tell people, but they put it in the Gemara. So, molicho pachot pachot me'arba amot. Okay, let's go back. This brings us back to the very beginning of Masechet Shabbat, all about hotza'at. If you remember, in order to be chayav in carrying, you have to do what we call an akira and a hanacha. You have to uproot something, pick it up, and you have to put it down. What if you walk? Okay, so there's two possibilities, right? You could actually never put it down and never pick it up, and maybe there's some solution there. Or you could pick it up and put it down every less than 4 amot. And then every time you walk, right, you walk and stop. And if you remember, stopping is like placing it down. So every time you walk and stop, walk and stop, less than 4 amot, and you keep doing this till you get home. It might take you a while to get home, depending on how far you are, but that's what you do. Every time you walk and stop, and then your akira and hanacha basically end the act. So you've done it with less than 4 amot, and that's a solution. So now the obvious question is, this is much easier than trying to find a donkey or a non-Jew or cheresh shoteh katan. This is a much better solution. Why didn't they just tell people to do this? Mishum, because of the following verse, the verse from Mishlei, Kvod Elohim haster davar, uchvod melachim chakor davar. This is very fascinating. We all know that when it comes to governments, everybody always complains, right? We want them to be what we call shakuf, transparent. We want to see everything that's going on. We want everything out there. We want all the information, even though we never really get it. But that's what we say. In order to have a proper government, the best thing is to have shkifut, to have everybody be able to see transparency. But the kavod of Elohim is haster davar, is to hide things. It's not always best to reveal everything in order to respect God, okay? It's another difference between God and other kings. It's interesting. Why, if you think about it, why do we always want to know what's going on? Because we don't trust the government, right? If you don't trust someone, you want transparency. When it comes to God, you have to trust in God entirely, and therefore we don't need transparency. It's a possible way of looking at it. So now they say, so what's the respect that's given to God by hiding, right? How does that help us? The concern is that if we say, do it less than 4 amot, imagine trying to walk like that home, right? You might accidentally walk 4 amot, right? It's not a big difference between walking 4 amot and less than 4 amot. People might make a mistake, and therefore we want to protect the Torah. How do we protect it? By not allowing you, by not giving you all the solutions, because sometimes certain solutions might lead to mistakes. So therefore, they'd rather protect the Torah, and this is what they do. And this leads us into this very interesting line. Tanya, Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Bo bayom gadshu se'ah. Okay, what's Bo bayom? If you remember, we learned this again. We're connecting back to the beginning of the Masechet. It's a nice way at the end. Often things connect to the beginning. So we learned all about the Yudchet Davar that they made these 18 Zerot, if you remember, and they weren't even all listed. We tried to figure out what are the exact 18. We had a whole long list. A lot of them had to do with Tumah and Tara, purity and impurity. This is one of the 18 Zerot that they said, which is that we're not going to allow people to walk less than 4 amot in a situation like this. So now Rabbi Eliezer's response, he says, on that day, which we also called it then, on that day, what's the issue? Gadshu se'ah, he says. What does that mean? They took our bundle that we have, or the basket, and they overflowed it. Okay, what does that mean? Overflow in a good way. Okay, they added more things, right? Imagine the Torah is like the barrel or whatever it's in the basket, and they added to it, right? They added to the Torah. I see someone asked to protect the Torah or to protect Shabbat. It's really both. It's to protect Shabbat, which protects the Torah. It's all one and the same. So they added all these zerot in order to protect the Torah. So adding on more is a good thing, right? Like you'd rather have a heaping bowl of something than a flat bowl of something. So he says this was all a good thing. This, by the way, fits in with Rabbi Eliezer. This is Rabbi Eliezer ben Horkanus. He was the one with Tanarosh Lachnai, and we call him the Shamuti, right? He was like Shammai, the kind of E-type. He was very zealous and, better to be more restrictive. Rabbi Yoshua, who's of the opposite approach, said, Omer boba yom machkusea. No, they actually, right, by adding, sometimes it causes things to spill out, okay? And if you add too much, it causes a spill. And all these zero were not so good. They added so much that it caused the Torah to get lost, okay? Things got people, and it's what happens. If you restrict people too much, they won't be able to do the restrictions. And if they can't keep the restrictions, right? Imagine you don't have a donkey, you don't have anything, right? And you can't get your money home. And they don't tell you, oh, you could just walk less than 4 amot. Well, you're just going to take that wallet and walk home regular. So by doing that, they're actually destroying the Torah. So he says it's not a good thing. Okay? Tanya. Mashal de Rabbi Eliezer lemad davar domeh. Now we're going to have 2 parables for this. Likupam le'at kishu'inu dlu'in. If you have a basket full of vegetables, Adam noten letocha chardal v'hi machzeket. Now, if you have it full of vegetables, we know there's always empty spaces. So if you pour mustard seeds in, what will happen? They'll fall within, they'll find places in which to rest, and they'll rest inside and they'll stay in the basket. So that's the idea of adding more. You can always find room for more. Mashal Rabbi Yeshua lemad davar domeh la'reva mele'at dvash. It's like a honey, something filled with honey. Noten letocha rimonim ve'egozim v'hi mikiah. If you have something full of honey and you put pomegranates or walnuts inside, what's going to happen? It's going to sink, obviously, and the honey is going to drip out, and that's a big problem. Okay, this whole issue about Gzeirot Chachamim is the topic of Gefet this week. If your Hebrew is good and you want to listen, it's the topic that they discuss in the shiur this week. You can find it on Hadron's Hebrew site, and all about, is it good to make Gzeirot or is it not good to make Gzeirot? And this is an age-old debate, right? How much should the law be restrictive? How much should it not be restrictive, right? How much do we need to make it a Torah Chaim, a way of life? We discussed this when we talked about Amir al-Akum, right? That to a certain extent, it ruins your Shabbat if we don't allow, right? On the one hand, there's the problem that how can we allow people to do work for us, or we can't desecrate Shabbat. On the other hand, if we don't desecrate Shabbat, we might end up losing Shabbat to a certain extent. So there's always this balance, and this is also all about this balance. Okay, that's the end of this topic. Now we're going to go back to Amar Mar, Eini monochri minicha lachamor. So now the second possibility was put it on your donkey. So the Gemara asks now, halo mechamer. But isn't this the melacha of mechamer? What's mechamer? It's not one of the melachot listed, but it's basically you're putting a load on a donkey to carry. You're leading that donkey. This is a problem because remember, your donkey is not allowed to do melacha on Shabbat. So isn't this forbidden also? So how can we allow this? The Rahman Amar, the Torah says, lo ta'aseh kol melacha. And then it says, you and behemtecha. So you're having your animal do malacha. How can this possibly be allowed? Amar of Adabar Ava, minicho ala keshehi mahalechet. Remember I said before, you need akira and hanacha. Has to be uprooted from this domain and put into that domain, or uprooted from the beginning of the 4 amot and then put down at the end of the 4 amot. In this case, what do? You take the donkey as it's moving and you put it on him while he's moving. If he's moving, if he's stationary, then when you put it on him, that's akira. You're removing it from your domain, right? He's then uprooting it from one place to another, and then that will be a malacha. But if he's moving as you put it on, then there's actually no akira. There's no uprooting actually done. So that's what you do. So now the Gemara says, but wait a minute. It's going to have to go do his thing at some point. So basically, what will happen? He'll stop. When he stops and starts again, that's again going to be the akira and the hanacha. So basically, you're going to end up at some point, he's not going to be able to walk straight the whole way unless it's a 5-minute walk. But assuming you're a long way from home, at some point he's going to do that. So what do we say? What's the solution? Everything is done while the animal is moving. So you put it on while the animal's moving. If the animal needs to stop, so you make sure to take it off the animal before the animal stops, and then there's actually no proper hanacha. Okay, and then it's not considered hanacha, and that's going to be allowed. And no proper akira. So now the Gemara says, if if you're going to do it in that way, then why don't you just do it together with a friend? We already learned shnayim shaseu. Two people do one malacha together. They're not obligated. So why don't you take a friend who's running and is moving? As he's moving, put it on him. He passes it back to you. Somehow you can manage to do this and avoid the problem with a friend, and then you don't need a donkey. It's much easier. So Amar Papa, kol shebegufo chayav chatat v'chavero patur aval asur. If you yourself can't do something on a doraita level, which is carrying here, doraita, then if you do it with two people, it's going to be forbidden from the rabbis. So basically, this is forbidden by the rabbis. But kol shechavero patur aval asur. But if it's something that, if you do it with a friend, it's going to be the Rabbanan, which is doing it together with someone. If you do it with your donkey, then in the same act that shnayim shaseu is forbidden from the rabbis, if you did that with your donkey, basically lechamer is considered shnayim shaseu because you're leading your donkey who's carrying it. So if you do it with your donkey, it's going to be permitted entirely. And that's why we do it with the donkey and not otherwise. Amrav Adabar Ava. What if you have a satchel, you're carrying something on your back before Shabbat starts? Now again, what's the issue? It's already on your back, which means there's no actual akira. You started with it on your back. Can you continue walking with it? So they say, Ratz tachtea ad shemegia lebeito. You run home with it. Okay, now the issue isn't because we want you to get this off your back as quickly as possible. The issue is, okay, dafka rat, specifically you have to run, it says. Aval kale kale lo, but you can't walk slowly. My timer. Kevan delele hekera atalemea bad akira vanacha. If you walk regular, the assumption here, by the way, is that you're carrying a big bundle. Most of the Mepharshim understand is something heavy. Something heavy you don't generally run with on your back because it's heavy, right? You walk slower. So if you run, then you remember, why am I running carrying this heavy bag? It must be because there's some reason. The whole issue is we're worried. We don't want you to walk because if you walk, you might forget that it's Shabbat or forget that you can't carry, and you might stop for a minute to take a break. But if you run, that'll keep reminding you all the time that this is just a special dispensation. We're allowing you to do this, but only if you run. And then most people say that if it was something small, it wouldn't work because you could run with something small, and therefore this wouldn't help you, for example, with your keys. If you have your wallet, this wouldn't help you because many people can also run with their wallet. It's not very heavy, that running will be such a noticeable difference. But now they say, wait a minute, sof kimate lebete, but what do you do when you get to your house? When you get to your house, at some point, you're going to slow down when you get home, and then you're going to end up with putting it down in the public, putting it from private to public. You're going to be, public to private. You're going to basically end up putting it down and in a slow manner. So it's a problem. So what do they answer? No. What do? You get to your house, you turn around, you face backwards the other way, and you throw it over your head, and you throw it into your house. So by throwing it and backwards, that already is going to be a shinoi, and that's what you would do. So if you have this bundle on your back, and all of a sudden Shabbat comes in, you're allowed to keep running, and then flip it, and throw it into your house when you get there. Now we're going to start a new section that we're only going to get to one part of it today, which is there's going to be 3 different versions of what Rami Bar Chama says. Amar Rami Bar Chama. Since we brought up this issue of mechamer, and we allowed you to do mechamer in this case, right? We allow you to say you could do it with your donkey, but, right, really the issue is, this is not really mechamer because the animal, you have to do it in a way the animal never really stops, okay? But if you did it with the animal stopping, that would be mechamer. The question is, what are you doing with, what is mechamer? Where is the malacha, and is it a malacha? Is it oraita? What are you obligated if you actually do mechamer properly? Let's say you take your animal and you put a load on your animal and you walk your animal wherever. So are you obligated to oraita? Is it, okay, now here's a fascinating question. We have Bava Kama where we talk about you're responsible for your animals, and if your animal does damage to someone, you're responsible. But what if your animal does malacha on Shabbat? Is that the same level of responsibility? When it causes damage to someone else, of course you have to pay. That's your responsibility. But if your animal, you're responsible to make sure your animal doesn't do malacha. What if your animal does malacha? Do you get skila? Right? Are you punished for this? So it's a fascinating question. So Rami Bar Chama says, according to this version, he says, you get stoned if your animal does work. If you're doing this kind of with your animal, but you're doing work through your animal, that's skila. My time. What's the reason? Amar Rava, Amar Kra, the pasuk says, as we said before, Lo taseh kol melacha, ata, and there's a few more words in between, uvehemtecha, you and your animal. So they say, behemto, dumi adideh. They put you right next to your animal. That means you and your animal in the same kind of way. Mahu b'shogeg chayav chatat b'mezid chayav skila. Af behemto nami b'shogeg chayav chatat b'mezid chayav skila. If you had done it yourself, you would get, if you don't do it unwittingly, you'd have to bring a korban chatat, sin offering. And if you do it on purpose, you get stoned. So likewise, your animal. And then you'll get the punishment for your animal. So Amar Rava doesn't like this. He says, Shtei tshuvot b'davar. I have two questions, and with this we'll finish. Dichtiv. First of all, it says, Torah achat yeh lachem lo oseh b'shgaga. V'hanefesh asher ta'aseh b'yad rama. There's one law for one who does b'shgaga and for one who does it on purpose. And this is talking about in the context of idol worship. So now it says, what do they learn from this pasuk? I'm not going into what the pasuk means. I'm just going to say the drasha. Huksha kol haTorah kula l'avodah zarah. Because it says there's one Torah. Now, Torah means law, but Torah also means Torah. So they say all of the Torah is like avodah zarah. In what sense? Ma avodah zarah da'avid ma'aseh begufei. You're only chayav in avodah zarah if you do an actual action. In this case, you're just speaking to your donkey and telling your donkey, prodding him along. So hachanami adavid ma'aseh begufei. You're not going to get punished unless you actually do something. Ve'odnan, and additionally it says, hamechalel et Shabbat b'davar shechayavin al zdono chatat al shigato chatav al zdono skila. It says, if you're mechalel Shabbat in a way that unwittingly you'd have bring a sin offering, and on purpose you'd intentionally you'd get stoned. That seems to imply what? Michlal di'ika midi de'en chayavin al shigato chatat al zdono skila. It's implying that there must be some other kind of malacha that you're not going to get punished in this way for. And what else would that be if not our case? Here you have a case where you didn't actually do it yourself, but you worked with your animal to do, and your animal did the work. That must be the case that you're not going to actually get skila for, and therefore also not chatat, a sin offering. So my niu lav de mechamer, isn't that mechamer? So they say no, we could give two other possible explanations. What's excluded from that Mishnah? Tchumin, v'aliva de Rabbi Akiva. If you remember, we've talked about this a number of times. Isur tchumin, which we'll get to much more in depth in Masechet Eruvin, our next Masechet, is according to Rabbi Akiva. He says tchumin is d'oraita, okay, and therefore tchumin's d'oraita, but you don't get skila for it or a sin offering. So therefore, that must be the exception. Or havara v'aliva de Rabbi Yossi, according to Rabbi Yossi. If you remember, why does it say lo tivaru esh b'chomash v'techem? It's the only malacha that's mentioned explicitly. So they say either it's to say that Lo tivaru esh is to say that each malacha you get its own independent punishment, its own independent korban sin offering, or according to Rabbi Yossi, it's lelav yatzat. If you remember, lechalek yatzat or lelav yatzat. Lelav means to say it's only a lo taseh and it's not skila. So therefore, those could be the exceptions and not this. And therefore, Rava has problems with this, and we're going to see the new versions of Rami Bar Chama tomorrow. Okay, with that, we'll finish for today. Have a good day, everybody.